Ethan's mother remarried when he was 15. That was the year Liam entered his life. An awkward, wide-eyed boy with a sketchbook always tucked under his arm. Their parents' wedding was a blur of forced smiles and unfamiliar relatives. But what lingered most in Ethan's memory was the way Liam barely spoke. He was quiet, reserved, seemingly lost in his own world. At first, they were just two boys forced to share a house, their only connection being the marriage certificate binding their parents. It started with small moments. A forgotten jacket draped over a chair, a brush of shoulders in the kitchen, the quiet of late nights when their parents had gone to bed. Their bedrooms were separated by a thin wall, and Ethan often heard the scratch of Liam's pencil against paper deep into the night. One evening, curiosity got the better of him. He knocked on Liam's door. "What do you always draw?" he asked. Liam hesitated before flipping the sketchbook around. The pages were filled with cityscapes, shaded in delicate strokes. But among them was something else. Faces, expressions frozen in fleeting emotions, some captured mid-smile, others lost in sorrow. Ethan recognized himself in a few of the sketches. "You draw me?" His voice was careful, unreadable. Liam shrugged. "You have a face that tells stories." Something shifted between them that night. The silence between them was no longer awkward but easy, filled with an understanding that needed no words. They weren't just stepbrothers now. They were confidants, allies in a home that never fully felt like their own. Ethan, usually reserved, found himself opening up. Liam listened, his eyes attentive, his presence steady. Months passed, and their bond deepened. They spent hours on the rooftop, watching the city lights flicker, sharing dreams neither had dared voice before. Liam wanted to be an artist. Ethan, despite his father's insistence on business school, dreamed of music. They spoke in hushed tones, as if their ambitions were fragile things that could shatter if uttered too loudly. But beneath the growing closeness, something unspoken simmered. Ethan felt it in the way Liam looked at him sometimes. Too long, too searching. He felt it in the accidental touches, the brush of hands that neither of them pulled away from fast enough. One night the tension cracked. It was raining and the power had gone out. They sat in the dim glow of candlelight, shadows flickering across the walls. Liam's gaze lingered. His lips parted as if to say something, but the words never came. Ethan swallowed hard, his pulse hammering. The space between them felt too small, too charged. Then footsteps echoed down the hall. Their mother's voice called out. The moment shattered. Liam jerked back, and Ethan forced himself to his feet. The unspoken remained just that, unspoken. But something had changed, and there was no turning back. For days after that night, neither of them spoke about what had almost happened. But the air between them had changed. Every glance held an unspoken question. Every touch lingered just a second too long. Ethan told himself it was nothing. Just the intensity of late nights, of secrets shared in hushed tones. But deep down he knew better. Liam, however, stopped hiding. He no longer looked away when Ethan caught him staring. He leaned closer when they spoke, his voice softer, more certain. It was Liam who shattered the fragile equilibrium one evening on the rooftop. "Ethan," he said, his voice steady, though his fingers twisted nervously in his lap. "Do you ever feel like we're something different?" Ethan's chest tightened. The city stretched before them, lights blinking like distant stars. He could lie. He could pretend he didn't understand. But the truth sat heavy between them, impossible to ignore. Yes, the word left him before he could stop it. Liam exhaled, almost in relief. And then, before either of them could overthink it, Liam reached for Ethan's hand. Their fingers laced together, warm and sure. The silence between them shifted. Not tense, not uncertain, but full. From that moment, they existed in stolen fragments of time. Late-night drives with music turned too high, hands brushing over gear shifts. Hidden corners of the library, where whispered words carried more weight than they should. Movie nights on the couch, where the distance between them shrank until it no longer existed. But secrecy came with its own weight. Every moment they spent together was shadowed by the reality of what they were. Stepbrothers, bound by a family that would never understand. Ethan found himself more cautious, glancing over his shoulder, pulling away just before doors opened. Liam, though, was fearless. He sketched openly now, capturing Ethan's face with a softness that made Ethan's stomach twist. Then came the first real kiss. It wasn't planned, wasn't dramatic. Just another night, just another quiet moment in the space they had carved out for themselves. Ethan had been strumming absent-mindedly on his guitar when Liam reached out, fingertips ghosting over his wrist. The touch sent something electric through him. When he looked up, Liam's expression was open, raw. Ethan didn't think. He leaned in and their lips met, tentative at first, then deeper, hungrier. The room spun, the world outside forgotten. But when they pulled away, reality crashed back in. "This is dangerous," Ethan whispered, his forehead resting against Liam's. Liam only smiled. Everything worth feeling is. For a while, they existed in that fragile, secret happiness. But happiness built on shadows never lasts. And the first crack was already forming. Secrets, no matter how carefully kept, have a way of unraveling. Ethan should have known. It started with a mistake, small, careless. Liam had always been reckless with his sketches, leaving pages scattered across his desk. But this time, he left something more damning. A poem, raw with longing, folded between the pages of his sketchbook. Their stepfather found it. Dinner that night was different. Their mother was quiet, too quiet. Their stepfather, usually indifferent, watched them with a gaze that felt like a loaded gun. When he finally spoke, his voice was like ice. "Do either of you have something to tell us?" Ethan's stomach nodded. Liam tensed beside him, fingers curling into his sleeve beneath the table. "What do you mean?" Ethan asked, forcing his voice steady. Their stepfather slid a crumpled page across the table. Ethan recognized it instantly. Liam's handwriting. The words too intimate, too unmistakable. Heat crept up his neck. Beside him, Liam sucked in a sharp breath. The silence stretched. Then, "Tell me it's not what I think it is." Their stepfather's voice was low, dangerous. Their mother's eyes were already glistening, her hand shaking where it clutched the napkin. Ethan's mind screamed at him to protect Liam, to take his hand and run. But fear was a stronger force. It clawed at his throat, twisted his insides. His stepfather was waiting, expecting something, an explanation, a denial. And then Ethan did the unforgivable. He pulled his hand away from Liam's, straightened his shoulders, and forced a laugh, sharp, bitter. "This?" He picked up the page, waving it carelessly before tossing it aside. "It's nothing. Just a joke." Liam flinched like he had been struck. "A joke?" His voice was barely above a whisper. Ethan didn't dare meet his eyes. "Yeah. He writes all kinds of weird stuff. It's nothing serious." Liam pushed back from the table, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He looked at Ethan then, really looked at him, and whatever he saw in his face made something inside him break. He left the room without a word. The moment the door slammed, Ethan felt the weight of what he had done settle like stones in his chest. His stepfather seemed satisfied. His mother looked relieved. But Ethan felt hollow. That night, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying Liam's expression over and over. The betrayal, the hurt, The next morning, Liam was gone. A suitcase missing, his room stripped bare. No note, no explanation. And Ethan? He had never felt more alone. Years passed, but the weight of that night never left Ethan. Regret clung to him like a second skin, a constant reminder of the choice he had made, the moment he had broken the only thing that had ever felt real. He searched for Liam in quiet ways, scanning unfamiliar crowds, lingering too long on faces that resembled his. But Liam had vanished, leaving nothing behind except the ache of what could have been. Then, one autumn evening, fate intervened. Ethan hadn't meant to stop at the art gallery. He was just passing through, seeking refuge from the cold, when something in the window caught his eye. A painting, breathtaking in its simplicity, haunting in its familiarity. A city skyline, rooftops bathed in twilight, two figures sitting side by side. His breath hitched. He knew that rooftop. He knew those figures. A familiar signature in the bottom corner confirmed it. Liam. His pulse pounded as he stepped inside. The gallery was small, intimate. People moved through the space in hushed admiration, but Ethan saw only one person. The man standing near the back, hands tucked into the pockets of a dark coat. His hair was a little longer, his shoulders a little broader, but there was no mistaking him. Liam. Liam turned slowly. Their eyes met, and for a moment, time folded in on itself. Ethan wanted to speak, to apologize, to say every word he had swallowed years ago. But what could he say that would make any difference? Liam studied him, expression unreadable. Then, in a voice quieter than Ethan remembered, he asked, "Why are you here?" Ethan swallowed hard. "I saw your work." He gestured to the painting, his chest tightening. "You still paint us?" Liam's gaze flickered to the artwork, then back to Ethan. "I paint memories." The words landed like a blow. Memories. Not present. Not future. Just something frozen in time, unreachable. "I'm sorry." Ethan's voice cracked, raw with everything he had held back for too long. "I was a coward. I hurt you, and I've lived with that every day since." Liam exhaled, his expression finally shifting, softening, just slightly. "I know." The silence between them stretched, heavy with unspoken things. Then Liam glanced at the painting again. "That night, I thought it was the worst moment of my life." He looked back at Ethan, his gaze piercing. "But it also set me free." Ethan's stomach twisted. "Free?" Liam nodded. "I stopped waiting for someone to choose me." The words were final, but they weren't cruel. They were truth. Ethan forced a smile, though his chest ached. "You've built something incredible." Liam returned the smile, small but real. "So have you, I hope." There was no dramatic reconciliation, no desperate pleas for a second chance. Just two people standing in the wreckage of what once was, acknowledging that some things, no matter how deep, cannot be undone. And sometimes that has to be enough.